Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Hopefully this live stream is going to be absolutely amazing. No, totally will going to be amazing. And for those that are watching live, happy Friday. Well, it's Friday in AEST, but happy Friday to those in AEST. Oh. But yeah, thank you all for joining us. Hopefully this session will be a lot of fun. Literally just geeking out with the amazing Ben Dechrai. But before we get to that, something we do in Australia, for those that aren't familiar, something we do in the Australian region is we like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands that we meet today. So with that in mind, I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the traditional owners on the lands that we meet today, with a special heartfelt respect and acknowledgement to the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional owners here in Narromine, which is in country New South Wales, which is where I'm currently broadcasting from. And I'd also like to pay my respects and acknowledgements to Indigenous elders past, present, and emerging. And thank you all for joining us again. We've got a really exciting live stream lined up for today. As we go along, if you do have any questions, please drop them in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye as we go, and we'll answer those, well, as we go. But this is a rather informal chat, so literally just geeking out with friends. Anyway, let's get underway. Let's bring out our, I want to say first guest, but it's our only guest for today. But this will be something we're going to be doing sort of on an ongoing basis. So if you have an interesting talk or an interesting project that you want to talk about on the live stream, please reach out. I'm at Developer Steve, kind of all over the internet, internet. Let's go with interwebs, all over the interwebs. So please reach out, say hi, and would love to see what you're doing and see if we can get you on. So finally, without further ado, let's bring on today's guest, which is my good friend Ben Dechrai. Let me change that bottom banner. Hey, there we go. Oh wait, you're on mute. I think I muted you. There you go.
Hello.
Right, hello.
You've all missed my first joke, haven't you?
Yes, I believe so.
It wasn't actually a joke. No, I was just saying my fingers were going numb. You first of all said, let's bring in, and then you digressed, which is, usual for you. No, that's fine. Yeah.
Oh, I had a whole intro planned with there was music, there was like a chorus line. It was
I was great, expecting like marching band music and confetti cannons.
Wait, I do have one thing that I can do right now. Hang on.
Oh, go for it.
Without further ado, here's Ben Dechrai. There's fireworks.
I feel very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, I'll read you around. So for those that haven't met Ben before, Ben Dechrai is a software developer with a wealth of experience ranging from small MVP projects to large-scale enterprise deployments. Passionate about working closely with developer and open source communities, which is where I've met Ben many, many, many years ago at a whole bunch of events. So many events. Ben has been coding since the age of 7 and enjoys helping developers find the joy of tech experimentation. So, welcome, Ben. Thank you.
I don't know where you got that bio from. Was that off my website?
Indeed, it was.
Indeed, it was. Okay. I'm also known for not updating my website very often. None of that is untrue. I do have a more recent one, though. It's a little shorter, a little easier for people to read out.
Oh, well, we can.
But you did it very well.
All right, thank you. Well, we can do a do-over. It's not live already. Oh, wait, it is live.
Oh. Is it not? It is.
So let's start with some questions.
Sure.
I mean, my first question, even based on that bio, is what got you into development? Why development? Like, what got you into development? Is something you've always been passionate about? But
look, yes, but I don't know why. I don't remember that first seed at the beginning. So a bit of background about my family life growing up. I grew up in Germany, and when I was 8, my parents separated, and my mum and my sister and I moved to the UK. My dad was still kind of part of our lives. He stayed over in Germany, but he was into computers as a hobby. He was a forensic scientist as well. So in the basement of the house in Germany, we had like laboratory grade testing machines, like the kind of testing machines that got pipettes and go around picking things out of test tubes, that kind of. So wow. And he was always programming them, and he was also into photography. So there was that kind of, he had a dark room, and there were was not necessarily computer programming, but there's processes, and so my dad was very process driven in the way that all of his hobbies and his work. So I think I probably got a lot of that from him. When we moved to the UK, I was 8, and within a year or so, he bought us a family PC. And for those of you who remember these things, it was a 286. I don't know if they had. I had a 486 SX25, and I think the SXDX originally came in at the 386 level. So it was a 286, whatever clock speed. It had a 5 megabyte MFM hard drive.
Wow,
massive.
With the boost button.
I didn't have a boost button on the hard drive.
Yeah,
the CPU boost overclocking button. Yes, it did have one of those.
Yes.
So I think it was like a 12 megahertz machine, which when you look at computers nowadays is a pitiful number. And I think you could boost it to 25.
Nice.
And it ran MS-DOS 5.0 and Windows 3.0 and all of these things. And I didn't realize, I don't know that I started from a position of being interested in security and privacy. I think I started from a position of wanting control, to be quite honest. And one of the early things, actually, my first computer was actually like an Amstrad CPC 6128, which was the one with the 3-inch floppy drive and the port on the side for a modem coupler. I remember connecting to my first BBS, bulletin board system. I'm really aging myself here right now, aren't I?
No, my first computer, Atari 800XL, and I also remember BBS back in the day, early web.
Back in the day. So actually that was my first computer. We had a Commodore something or other with the cartridge games that plugged into a TV. I think it was actually like an RF cable out. That's how old the technology was. It didn't have SCART or VGA or any of those things. Definitely didn't have HDMI. So probably the Amstrad CPC 6128. I remember buying the Amstrad CPC 6128 Omnibus book for learning how to program my own programs. Do you remember the days when you used to buy books and copy the text out?
Yeah, I remember
You'd actually
that. And also,
it.
You'd get the, this is probably more of a 90s thing, but you get the 3.5 discs, the shareware, the Amiga magazines and stuff. Oh,
yeah,
everyone
I used to
hanging
spend
for that.
way too much on all the computer magazines. At one point, my dad pulled me aside and he said, "How much are you spending a month on magazines? And is that really the best use of your money?" And I'm the kind of person, or I was at that age anyway, where I felt that was a huge judgment, and I felt guilt when he said that to me. So I can actually feel those feelings coming back now.
But maybe you'll make a career of like this whole tech thing.
Look, I think I might get into it. It's something I've been considering, moving into the software engineering space. I hear it's quite fun. I hear that depending on the kind of role, you might even get some travel.
It'll come back.
Justin says then you have to pour through pages of the book to find your typo. Oh my God, typos. They were the worst. Especially because the old editors, you wouldn't even be able to edit your typo in the same way as you do nowadays. You'd have to rewrite the whole line.
Yeah. Yeah, you would.
Thanks for that memory, Justin.
And thanks for dropping that in the chat, Justin.
Yeah.
Actually, so what was your first language that you're programming in?
Basic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first one. It was very closely followed by assembly.
I
don't know why I jumped into that. I think it was because it was free, because in MS-DOS you could just start debug, which is not really an assembly text code editor. If anybody knows of debug, the command line tool for MS-DOS, it's not a programming. It's definitely not an IDE. But I wanted to do some low-level stuff, and I didn't want to learn C, whatever it is I would have had to learn.
Yeah, I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole. Actually, we were talking about this the other day because I'm kindred spirits as far as first programming language go, because mine was basic as well. And you actually told me about a function which I'd never used. So for those that aren't familiar with basic, I mean, it's pretty basic, but 10 print hello, 20 go to 10, and there's a screen full of like hellos.
Yeah.
And so the problem was, as you were coding basic, is you'd have to keep track of your numbering to make sure you didn't overlap and that everything was kept in order. And if you had to go back and recode something, what I used to do is renumber everything. And Ben was like, no, you could just use the function renumber. And I was like, wait, what? And so it turns out there's this function that goes back through the numbers and renumbers everything for you, even though it has like one line will be like line 50, it will renumber that number irrespective of what the actual number is.
And the standard ordering in BASIC used to be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50.
Yeah, to make sure you
actually
had space.
Renumber it into that, which meant that you could add a line 15 if you thought, you know what, before this line here, I need to insert something. So renumber would then renumber it as 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. But renumber also takes arguments. So you could renumber it as 100, 200, 300, 400, or even start at a certain point through the code, and from that point onwards, renumber it with a certain offset. So it was, yeah.
So, I mean, now I have something to answer that question when someone asks, like, what was something you could tell your past self is renumber from BASIC. That's now my thing.
Right. So when you said you renumbered it, you would actually manually delete a line and rewrite it as a new number?
Yep.
Wow. Okay, if only there was a function to make that easier for you, Steve.
Oh, I wish I'd known about that one. Sometimes it pays to read the entire book.
I was going to say RTFM helps.
But also, I mean, this was, and this sort of goes to part of your bio as well. This was, I mean, back in those times, there wasn't the open source easy access like to open source communities that we now have, which is we were
talking just before about connecting to bulletin board systems, and in those days you were paying by the minute for your phone line, and it would tie up the whole household's phone line, or it was expensive to join any kind of online community, if you can call it that still. I guess it was in a way. So to spend the time to do that, and then also you used to get software that would automatically dial up, pull down any new messages off a forum, and then disconnect to save you time and stop your mother from complaining, and your father and your sister and your brother and everybody from complaining about you tying up the phone line. It was just so much harder. So even if there was a community, it was a tricky thing to be involved with.
Yeah, which makes me appreciate more now as the open source world has sort of expanded more, matured more. We've seen communities obviously build out some really cool projects, which then gets adopted industry wide, and well, we're all products of open source now.
Aren't we? Is this also the point where we as old geezers start complaining at the youth of today who have it way too easy?
Back in our day there was no libraries.
Yeah. Alexa has just added, the flip side to this is that people would take the time and think before dropping a question. It's very true. I mean, if you asked a question, you were investing in checking up on the answers in the future as well. But I wonder how many, not just stupid questions we wouldn't have, but also trolling wasn't a thing. It was expensive to troll.
Yeah, you pay per troll.
Yeah. Totally.
So tell me of a recent project that you've been working on. I mean, you've
in BASIC.
Could be BASIC, could be anything.
Well,
could be
the most recent project that I wrote in BASIC was about 30 years ago, so I don't even remember what that was. Well, so there's two things. There's one thing that I've been trying to work on for a while, and the whole COVID thing was an opportunity to really jump on top of it, but also killed my motivation, I guess. And that's a tool. So as you know, in our industry, we do a lot of travel. And even before I became a developer advocate at Auth0, I was traveling. I was an independent software security consultant type person. And I've always loved speaking at conferences and getting involved in the open source community. So I would still speak 2 or 3 times a year. Obviously, being self-employed, it meant that every time I went away for a week to speak at a conference, I wasn't getting any income. So working for a company where travel was part of my job just meant that I was able to scale that up, and I was doing it a lot more. But even before, I was traveling a fair amount, and I've always been conscious about the environmental impacts that has, and especially in terms of CO2 emissions of flying and various other aspects to life. I buy a lot more equipment for my home office than an average person because I've got lights and a green screen and padding, and so all of this has built-in transport costs. I can't remember off the top of my head what that term is, but the embedded cost on the environment of these purchases. And to the extent that I was measuring that impact that negative impact that I was making, and I always wanted to offset that in a positive way. So one of the things that I used to do was every year I would create a rough calculation of how much CO2 I was emitting through my daily life as well as my work life. And I would calculate how many trees would need to be planted to offset that. And then I would find a company that, or usually a community organization or a charity that would plant that number of trees on behalf of people. And every year I'd research a new company to see if there was anybody, I don't know, they all have their pros and cons. So I was trying to find new ones.
Mm.
And while I was doing this research 2, maybe 3 years ago now, time is an amorphous concept to me. I don't even know where we are. We're still in March 2020, right?
Yeah, totally. So, that's when everything stopped.
Yeah. So I was doing research, and interestingly, I found, and this is going totally non-tech all of a sudden, but interestingly, I found that trees are not actually the best way of offsetting CO2. And this was surprising to me, because I thought, well, it's not just about CO2 either. Like, the deforestation causes a whole raft of other issues. So there's a benefit to reforesting, regreening, whatever, the planet. But in terms of purely saying I want to invest money with a primary goal of improving carbon absorption, carbon offsetting in the world, trees have a maximum lifetime. There's a maximum amount of CO2 that they can sequester, I think is the word I'm looking for. So I thought, well, what are the other options? And apparently doing things like funding a company to, or again, a usually charitable organization, to provide rocket stove heaters to people in developing countries can have a massive effect, not just on the amount of CO2 that they are emitting through open fire cooking and all of those kind of things, but it also improves their health, because a lot of them are cooking inside their dwellings, which means there's a lot more smoke. And rocket stove heaters are they pollute a lot less, but they can also channel the smoke out, so they're a health benefit. So, and it's an ongoing thing. Like, that rocket stove is going to offset a certain amount of CO2 every year, unlike a tree, which grows to its full size over however many years, and then it stops absorbing CO2. So I found all of these really interesting ways of offsetting, and I thought, like, I can't actually, I mean, the amount of CO2 that I need to offset and the minimum amount that you often have to donate to these organizations, it might be a minimum $10, but if I sponsored all of these programs that I wanted to, then I would be offsetting 10 times my CO2, which in itself is not a bad thing. But I thought maybe there's an opportunity here to allow other people to benefit from this as well. Can I create a platform where people who want to offset their CO2 can essentially park their money, and then the platform, probably me as it grows, hopefully other people as well, would be able to use that money to best invest in CO2 offsetting programs, which means that I can then leverage other people's desire to do the same thing to support these better, in big air quotes, these better programs. Yeah. So I started writing this platform called Hoist, which that was the idea, is to be able to offset CO2 through a subscription model, essentially, or a one-off payment, or whatever you wanted. But it was 2 levels. One, you could just become a donor, I suppose, a subscriber, to say, I want to pay this amount every month, and as it accumulates to a certain amount, then it can be invested into an organization that can help. But the flip side as well was a community around that, because again, I didn't want to be the arbiter of who was worthy of receiving this money, and also I don't want to be wholly responsible for having to research the entire world. There are lots of people out there who have similar interests, and also, so I thought, well, let's create a community where you don't even have to be a subscriber to be a researcher, maybe. I don't know if that's the term that I was thinking at the time, but having people come together and say, hey, I've just found this organization, we can have a chat in a forum, or a what's that platform for chatting that most people use nowadays? Discord.
Discord, Slack, yeah.
Yeah, Discord. So I think there's a Discord server out there somewhere for this. But it's all like totally, it's not even in beta. Like, one of the issues that I found with this, and this is kind of learning out of this project, is the way I was structuring this was, I thought this is a great opportunity to do 2 things. 1, build a product, and 2, create a series of videos and live streams to help other people learn things about new technologies. So I did an episode on integrating Auth0 for authentication, another episode with Thor from Stripe, and he helped me implement the payment side of things. And then I had another session, a live session with somebody else about a back-end GraphQL-based database. And I thought this is a great way of picking particular technologies that I want to learn, getting another expert in, and sharing that with the community. The downside to that, though, is that I reached a point where there was nobody else who could help me, and I lost momentum. And also, I was relying on a whole load of technologies that I wasn't hugely familiar with. And I was starting to get to the point where I was just spending time trying to plug things better together and together better. And the project has stopped. So I think what I'll probably need to do with this one, because I do want this to still be a thing. Hoist.earth, if anybody wants to look at it. There's actually a website up there at the moment with all the videos and stuff. So what I'm probably going to do is redevelop this from scratch in technologies that I actually know better, so I can actually get to a point where there's something that I can deploy into production. And maybe I'll still do live streams around it, get people involved through just accompanying me through the process, or if somebody wants to jump on a stream with me, maybe. But I think the focus, if you, and I wasn't expecting this monologue of mine to be a pep talk about how to start your own business. But if anybody out there is thinking of doing something on the side, work out your priorities. Do you want to create a set of videos to help people learn technologies, or do you want to create a product that you can actually put into production? And the two paths are similar but different. So consider that before you start, unlike me.
I mean, this goes back to that whole, and I do love that whole approach of, the open source learning that kind of goes back to the whole fundamentals of, an open source community. So, but I think you're right. Like the business side is somewhat separate to the whole open source side of things.
Definitely.
So one other question I had before we discuss tokenization.
The actual purpose of this talk.
The actual purpose. No, it's fine.
We might get there eventually.
I like those live streams. Oh, wait, this is informal. But I like those live streams you're doing last year as well. Like that whole, cause you were literally learning on the fly and like sharing stuff. So,
and I think in a way, just before we go on to your next question, I think in a way that probably also held me back, because I was learning on the fly. There is value, especially the kind of videos that we do for the companies we work for as developer advocates. There's value in learning it and doing it once, and then recording the process separately so that you know where you're going. So it becomes more directed. I think there's value in what I did in terms of, one of the reasons I love giving live demos on stage is because, yes, they will go wrong sometimes, but in a way that permits people to try, because if I can get it wrong on stage, they can get it wrong in private. Often people see demos that just work perfectly and they're like, well, I don't know enough, I can't get started. So the perspective of my streams and my videos is also to help people get the confidence of trying stuff, because even the person making the video isn't perfect. But that also changes the direction and changes the conversation, the style of the conversation that you're having.
Now, I'm going to pivot here because I'm going to mention my I've done a lot of events over the years. Like my 100th talk was 2016, and we've been in a lot of events together. And I think you know what I'm about to do with this. My favorite demo fail moment of all time. Oh, you know exactly what I'm going to mention.
I know where you're going.
PHP Australia 2015.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the most, Rasmus, the creator of PHP himself, helped fix that from the audience, which like it's still my most favorite demo fail moment, because not only did you handle it amazingly well, like brilliantly well, and in my opinion, that's a sign of a really good speaker. But you had the entire audience helping you fix it, and like by the time we got halfway through your session, the original talk was gone, but you still put together the best demo fail talk I have ever seen anywhere.
If there's one thing people got from that talk, it's about demo fails. Probably not the intent, and also, but there we go.
I mean, the other thing, it brought, like, it was phenomenal the way that all got brought together. And also special mention here, because Murphy's Law we're taught like never strikes 3 times, but in this talk, like before this talk even started, it did, because there was 3. Your computer failed. Your forget who, I think it was Will's computer failed. There was someone else's that failed, and you kind of got one working, and you went up and it still failed.
3 computers and all sorts involved. I blogged it, and I got to backup plan 13 or something. Like there were so many things that went wrong. But yeah, we got through it, and the demo worked, and the talk worked, and there was even one point you mentioned that Rasmus was shouting out ways of solving the problems. There was also really interesting learning, I think, for him, because and Alexis just asked whether this was the virus talk, and yes, I've got to talk about writing viruses. And the bug in the software that I wrote that allowed the virus to take hold was one that Rasmus proposed would probably never happen. And I hadn't actually done any analysis or data gathering on this. So I just said to the audience, hands up how many of you have seen a bug similar to this. And basically it was a misunderstanding of the way that a certain function worked that opened a vulnerability. So I said, have you ever seen a function being used in a way that works but created an unintentional consequence that could potentially open your system up to a vulnerability such as this? Specific or particularly also if that function is one that you would expect most people to understand what its actual function is for, which kind of summed up exactly what I'd done in my gallery application, and half the room's hand went up. And I think for Rasmus, who, look, all dues to him, he never intended to create one of the world's most popular languages. For him, he was just creating a platform for making it easier for developers to add a bit of functionality to their websites. So unintended consequences happen in the best of cases, and I think that was probably a learning experience for him as well. So we all learned something that day.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I mean, it was a happy happenstance. But yeah, that was still one of my favoriteest talks. We might just go to the next question now.
Sure. I mean, it's only been 27 minutes.
It's only, oh yeah, that's true. See, you even said we'd probably go over, but anyway, I mean, we're going to talk today, and this sort of goes back to that whole, what kind of is related to the virus talk you did that time, because it's all about like protecting our end users, like looking after them, making sure they've got they're having a safe experience, because like as developers, we build these applications to in some way affect our end users' lives in some way, be it an ordering app, be it a social connection app. And so part of that journey too is protecting their experience, making sure they're safe, making sure their data's safe, making sure they're secure as well. Which brings us to today's topic, which is tokenization. And like I've been a big fan of tokenization for many years, and I hadn't actually used it a whole lot, particularly on the user side of things, but in payments. But applying the same techniques to identity, things like identity and logins and stuff, was absolutely amazing when started seeing the likes of, started using it in Auth0. I am an Auth0 ambassador. Proud ambassador. For me, like, it just makes it's so easy. It's like a few lines of code and whatnot. But what's you're massive in the big fan of the whole privacy security space for many, many years. But what's the importance of good auth for security, in particular tokenization?
So tokenization, I think, is just an implementation. I don't think it makes you any more or less. There's kind of two questions overlaid there. So why is authentication important for security of a web application? I think if you look at, especially 10, maybe not even 10, but 10 plus years ago, and even nowadays, if you spin up a Laravel application, you can do an artisan make auth, and you've got authentication built out of the box. It's really simple. It uses bcrypt. It's nice and secure. There's probably not a lot that can go wrong with that. Even if you get a data breach, probably going to be okay. But it's important to get that right, because that is the entry point at which your users make themselves known to your application. And if there's any vulnerability in there, then you have the potential to give people who shouldn't necessarily have access to something. And I think when we look at things like, you mentioned you use tokenization and payments, and let's not talk about tokenization just yet. But one of the things with payments is nobody writes their own payments unless you work for PayPal or Stripe or any of these other organizations that actually do payments. Your job as a software developer, your productivity as a software developer in an organization isn't made better by you implementing payments yourself. It's better spent working on the actual application that gives your company a point of difference in the market. So people don't write their own payments, they don't write their own crypto. You shouldn't be writing your own auth either, because there are so many things that happen under the hood with authorization, and so many things that are changing as we learn new things about security vulnerabilities and talking about unintended consequences, the ways the browsers operate in terms of cookies. We've got an interesting situation at the moment, or have had, with third-party cookie support in browsers. And if every organization around the world who has rolled their own authentication needs to solve this problem, that's a lot of repeated person hours, developer hours of work. So I think it's, and you don't have to use a software as a service provider like Auth0. There are off-the-shelf products as well, open source ones that are third-party API identity providers. And when I say third-party, I mean third-party to your application. It could still be hosted by you if you want. So I think it's important to get that right. And I'm making a number up, finger in the air kind of thing. 99% of all applications require some kind of identity nowadays. It's very rare that you find an application where the application doesn't need to know who you are, whether it's because there's payments involved or because there's the ability to store information, and obviously only you should be able to get access to that, like an online text editor, for example. There are very few examples nowadays of not requiring identity in some way. And it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel over and over again. So I think it's important to get security right and to use a product, whether it's a hosted, paid-for service, or like Auth0's got free tiers. The other providers, I'm sure, do as well. Or you get something off the shelf, not off the shelf, off the an open source product like Keycloak, and implement that. The underlying protocols are all there. They're all using OpenID Connect and OAuth 2.0, and these standards allow you to almost plug and play any identity provider with any software through the use of again, mostly open source SDKs or libraries that allow you to integrate your applications. And you're essentially outsourcing all of the complexity of this to a community, both open source and proprietary, a community of people whose focus is this area, whereas most developers' focus is not this area. Most developers don't even focus on security, and I'm not saying that in an accusatory way. It's just a fact of life. Most companies want to build software and get stuff out the door, and security is often a bolt-on. So if we as software developers in a normal organization don't have the time, or I want to say the word permission, that does sound a little accusatory, but if we don't have the ability to focus on security, then should we be considering focusing on authentication and identity at all? I would argue no. So I think it's very important to get that right. And getting it right can often mean not making it your problem, making it somebody else's problem who is more committed or has a bigger vested interest in getting it right. If that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. I mean, one of the things like I always loved, and like I mean, you've done a lot of hackathons too, but I've done a lot of hackathons, like mentoring, judging, etc., sponsoring. One of the things in particular that I've always loved about the Auth0 integration, and I recommended like this a lot last couple of years with the Call for Code program with IBM that I was heavily involved in. But the thing I was finding is a lot of the teams, and this sort of goes back to what you're saying of like, don't reinvent the wheel. But a lot of the teams had limited time, like a 24-hour window to build out an application really quick. The last thing they want to do is reinvent a wheel that someone's already like gotten really, really good.
Definitely.
And in particular, and that's why I always loved saying, well, just put Auth0 in. You can go on like with the rest of your 24 hours. It's only going to take you 10 minutes to set up. Probably not even.
I think one of the things that I find most interesting nowadays is that, again, looking at the 10-year-old example, that if you wanted to spin up a very simple shopping cart website, you'd probably be spending weeks writing your own back in the day. Whereas nowadays, you could set up an Auth0 account, a Stripe account, a Vercel account, and perhaps if you wanted to, a Mongo service. Arguably, you wouldn't even need your own database. You could just do some kind of hosting, an API capability, Auth0 and Stripe, and you can write a shopping cart platform in a day.
Yeah,
I reckon.
Yeah,
And all you're doing is you're writing the glue, which means that all of that, like you say, I don't know whether this is what you're about to say, but the hardest parts are dealt with by the other organizations. The software's there to do it for you.
I was going to say the hardest part is, and this always drives me crazy, is the design, like the theme.
Yes, yeah, totally. But even with that, so I've been using, damn it, I can't remember what it's called now. Developer Jack had recommended it to me at one point. He's used to be DevRel for Microsoft up in Sydney, and there's a tool, words are failing me at the moment, that allows you to define views in a way that heavily uses class names to style the HTML that you're looking at.
Yeah, and then you can get like reuse elements.
Totally reusable elements. But what they've done is they've created a paid-for product, and it's like, I think it's like $100 or something for one project, or $300 for unlimited projects. So it's relatively affordable for most businesses, and it basically componentizes a whole lot of things. So I wrote another project actually called Rafflist, RAFFL.ist, because I love my weird domain names. And it was basically for a charity that I'm involved with, and they wanted to run an online raffle. So I wrote a raffle application, and the template that I used was based on, I used just the free open source tooling that they provide. I didn't pay for the extra package, but that's something I'm considering doing for Hoist. And it makes it really easy because I'm a developer without a designery mind, which presumably for you is the same issue. That's the hard part. But if you've componentized UI elements, that makes things a lot easier. So even going for something like Bootstrap is going to make your life easier if you want to spin something up quickly.
Oh no, I was thinking also more just the coming up of the initial design, more than but that is cool too. I mean, the thing I always struggle with is just coming up with, what's this going to look like, and then I choose colors that may not
go well
great together. Like, but brown and orange. I mean, everyone's brown and orange. Anyway,
I mean, there are tools online that'll give you suggested color palettes, and I've used those. And I get it wrong.
Yeah, right. But if it's coding, this kind of pivots into another thing I wanted to talk about is like with the universal login, like you can theme that the style, like you have a whole bunch of different style options inside that, which I always love as well.
I should. We've actually changed it recently. I'm just going to do. Do I have the ability to do a share screen?
You should do. I think I have to switch to.
I think I can do that.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
You can bring it in or something.
Just so here we go.
Here's a login I had prepared earlier. So we've changed the menu a bit on the left, and I haven't played with the branding side of things, but there are, like, you've always been able to change color schemes and add a logo in. One thing I like that they've added recently, I don't know how recently, is how traditionally you log in with a username and password on one screen? They've now got the classic experience. They've now got the new experience, which allows you to, is it this one? It might not actually be lightweight, faster visuals. It's not actually this setting here. It's a setting somewhere else. It might be under Authentication Profile. Here we go. So generally you have the identifier and password. You can actually now do the identifier first, where it just asks you for your email address, and then in the next screen it asks you for your password. And the advantage of this is that if you do something like an Azure AD integration, where certain domain parts of the email might say, well, okay, say for example, you've got this at Sneak, and you say, if I log in with ben@dechrai.com, it says, okay, tell us your password. Whereas if you log with steve@sneak.com, then it's going to say, oh, we've identified from your domain that you're actually logging in with Azure AD or any kind of other third-party identity provider. And it'll redirect you to that login process, rather than the old style where you'd have enter your username and password, or do you want to log in with, and you'd get the little box down at the bottom. Like, There's not an example on this one here, but you know how some of the login forms have a login with Twitter, login with Google, you can have a login with Sneak. So rather than having to specifically enter a different workflow, it can detect that based on this identifier first. So there's some really nice different UX things going on here.
Which I always love because, I never, I had this with Sessionize the other day. Like, I never remember what I use to log into a particular site. And so you go there and you're like, did I use Twitter? Did I use but if I'm using that email address anyway for that platform, it kind of auto detects and
totally
does its thing.
But I think this is what you were referring to before, the level of customization. So you can actually override the entire HTML document. Which I'm not sure. I've not checked a whole lot of. I don't often do like competitor analysis or whatever you want to call it. Mostly because there are so many changes happening within Auth0. I can't possibly also know exactly what all the changes are in other companies. So by the time I've compared something, it's probably changed anyway. So I don't know how many others provide this, but you could technically change this completely to look exactly like your website. I've seen some Atlassian, for example. They're a customer of ours, and you look at their login page, it does not look like an Auth0 login page. So you can do whatever you want, really. It's pretty cool.
Which is cool because it blends, like it feels more integrated and personal when you go there and the login box actually matches.
And your users are never going to care that it's Auth0. There might be a small subset of people who go, oh, look, that's Auth0, and think, yeah, that's kind of cool, or maybe it's not, I don't know. But your users don't care who provides the login in the background. So if you can provide a more smooth user experience and it doesn't even feel like they've left the website, that's a great thing.
Yeah, which I'm always a big fan of. And plus, again, like this is about protecting the login, protecting their security, protecting their privacy, which big fan of because, I mean, that's why we build these apps. That's why we're building these things out. So you actually mentioned an interesting point there too with the whole, well, actually I mentioned it too, being able to integrate into multiple services, which I'm always been a big fan of because when a new service comes along, you don't have to integrate with your website anymore. If Auth0 is integrated with it, you just hook up an API or talk more about that one.
So the best story I've ever heard, remember when Apple turned around and said that any apps in their app store had to support Apple login?
Yeah.
You just come in here and you add it. So this is actually the best real-life feedback that I've had from people that I met at events back in the day. And they said we had only recently, one of them in particular said, we've only recently implemented Auth0, but just the ability to turn Apple login with Apple, whatever it's called, at a click of a button and be able to re-upload our application. In fact, they didn't even need to re-upload their application into the pool because it's configuration-based at that point. So immediately, whenever anybody logged in, they were suddenly able to do login with Apple. So that helped a lot of people out. But yeah, I mean, we support so many different. These are just the social ones. So we have a differentiation between social, enterprise kind of logins. So you can log in with Discord or Twitch. You can even create a custom one if you want. We have, I think, what's the most obscure one in here? We've got Weibo, so you can do that. But then the enterprise side of things, and this becomes more applicable to that user interface, the login flow that we saw before, is you can add a whole lot of different Active Directories. There's SAML and all sorts of support within this. As you can see, I'm not allowed to use it currently. But,
can I make a request for? I mean, this is probably more of an.
You can request anything you like, as long as I don't have to promise to provide it.
It just occurred to me on the fly. A random thought, but it would be cool for next April Fool's Day. And I know it's kind of unfashionable now to do the whole April Fool's Day thing for tech companies to some extent, but I would love to see an MSN Messenger in there.
Okay, I will. I'll make a note of that.
That would just be like
Messenger.
Supporting MSN
Social login for April Fool's.
That was maybe it's brought back memories of when we were talking about like the days of old, and it's like that was huge back in the day.
What about ICQ?
ICQ was great, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I could never get that user interface though.
Wasn't it brilliant?
no, and you're like, what do I click? Like, anyway. So one thing like we launched recently, actually, it was fun being part of the ambassador program. You've got regular calls with the ambassadors, bring them all onto a video call, and sort of you walk through new features, new upcoming features, and kind of how they work. So one thing we've obviously had recently is the whole actions, Auth0 actions, which is pretty cool. Take us through that. Tell everyone about that one.
So if you've used Auth0 before, you might be familiar with rules and hooks, which now both lie under the auth pipeline tab over here. We used to have a separate one for rules and a separate one for hooks. The idea with rules was that you could run any kind of rule after a user logged in. So it's like a post-authentication hook as such. And then we thought, well, we need different kind of hooks. So we wrote different hooks, and there are 5 of them here. I won't go through each of those right now. But these were then 5 more hooks, and the idea was that post-authentication would come in here as well, because the interface here has changed slightly. And what we decided to do was not scrap them, because they're there still, but they will be deprecated at some point in the future. They've been replaced completely by actions now, which allows you to define a library of scripts that you can then add into various different flows. So I don't know if I've got any examples in here. I don't. All right, let's add a custom action. I want to build a custom action, not add a custom action. Now, because I was involved in creating the video and the blog post for when this went live in May or June, I have a feature flag in my account which shows me special things that won't appear normally. Now, I keep forgetting to, but the version and runtime here will not appear for most people. So ignore that. Everyone gets version 2, and everyone. Actually, you might get runtime. I don't know. I'll have to remove the feature flag and find out, but you can choose, obviously, choose node 16 if you can. So we'll create a new action here. Let's call this action. What kind of action can we do? I want to. My brain's just gone blank. Let's just do a test action for now, and we'll see what we can do. So there are different kind of triggers that you can act this action on, and an action is basically just a hook that's added into a workflow somewhere. So let's do a post or pre-user registration. That could be fun. So at this point here, the user hasn't got an account yet. They've just said, OK, well, I want to create an account. They've entered their username and password. And this allows you to hook into what's happening at that point there. So I can, if I can type, I can look at what's going on in the event. And the event that comes through is going to give us information about a user. And that user is going to have an email. So maybe what I could do is a comparison here, or maybe like a match. That's the one I'm looking for. So maybe I want to match on example.com as a domain name. So I can say if the user's got example.com, then I can do certain things. So this allows you to define custom arbitrary JavaScript that we host on our servers. Essentially, it's almost like Lambda functions, but specifically around the authentication flow. And then what I can do is just put an if in there. And for now, I'm just going to do a console.log of example user. Right, so why does it not like this? Object is possibly undefined. There we go. I'll fix that. So one of the things that with rules and hooks was it was very hard to test this before it went into production. So it actually went live and started getting run. In some cases with rules, for example, if you hit save, it became immediately executable. So a lot of people would have test tenants within Auth0 to try stuff out first. We can actually now test over here and run this against a user. So if a user is about to register, this is the kind of event information that might come in. And if we look under user here, we can see this might be an example of what the user has provided when they've created an account. And I didn't plan for this, but it has example.com in there. So if I run this now, then the output of this will show the log example user. So this is now working. So it's just been saved as a draft. At this point here, I can now deploy it. And this now makes this code available for us to add into a flow. But that doesn't actually happen until we specifically add it in. So I can now come in and choose one of these flows, pre-user registration. I want to then drag this. Why is it not showing up?
Live demos. Friday
Live
afternoon.
Demos.
This is cool though, because this starts to just while you're trying to get it working, which it'll work in a moment. But yeah, this is one of the things, and why I always recommend this for hackathons is it just the versatility of being able to build like into really quick projects is the thing that I love the most about
Totally.
this. Yeah. But the actions in particular is literally, can I call it a Lambda function before it's a Lambda function? Kind of is.
They kind of are Lambda functions. It's not as powerful as AWS Lambda or Vercel's API hosting. You can't call this from third parties. Like you can't put a bit of JavaScript code in here and then call it from your application. It's only for, but it is a Lambda function around the authorization flow context within Auth0.
Yeah, which is why it's a Lambda before it's a Lambda. But actually, that would make a good topic for a meta Lambda. Yeah, that sounds good. I have you know how I'm partial to a tech joke. I do have a tech joke.
I did not know that for you at all. Is that an attribute of yours?
Which this actually came from a good DevRel friend of mine. But what meat do you put in a functional burger? Lambda. Anyway, there you go.
Very good. So I've realized why I couldn't find it, because the interface has changed. And because Actions is quite new, there are a lot of changes going on. So it doesn't surprise me that I couldn't find it. I noticed when I went back to the library and suddenly I couldn't see any of my functions anymore. It's because we've now split those out into installed functions and custom functions, because you can also have installed functions over here through the marketplace. So marketplace allows you to plug in third-party functionality into your authorization flows as well. So it appeared under custom. And you can see I've got a couple of let's just jump into one of these actually and have a look at the code here, because this might be slightly more valuable in terms of an example than the one that I just did. So in this particular case, we're doing it on after login. So after the user logs in, we're going to make a request to the app metadata, which is stored within the user object. And this comes through the event user. So event user will also always provide any information that we know about the user for you to use in your code. App metadata is arbitrary JSON that you can store against the user within our system. And if in there's an attribute called Stripe customer ID and it's set, or rather with a bang here, if there isn't one set, then we're going to make an Axios request to the Stripe endpoint. And we're going to pass in API stuff, like this is just demo code. You need an API key and so forth. But we're going to ask it to create a customer with a metadata of the user ID of the user who just logged in. So when I create an account in Auth0 under the user management over here, each user's got their own ID. We're passing that in. So now Stripe has a new customer with a reference back to the Auth0 user. And then once that's done, is we grab the ID that Stripe returns, so the Stripe's customer ID, and we add that into the app metadata of the user. So we've now got this two-way binding in the Stripe's customer metadata and the Auth0 user's app metadata to kind of link those two together. So this is an example when I was saying before that you could potentially write your own shopping cart system without needing your own database, because Stripe knows everything about the products and the purchases and the orders and the invoices and the payments and blah, 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 blah. And Auth0 knows everything about the identity. And if those two can reference each other without the need for a third-party database, this is a way that you could do that. So we've created these in here. If we then jump over into flows, the reason I couldn't see it before is because we've also got these two new tabs over here. So we've got custom and installed. So this is the test one that I wrote. You can basically just drag it in. And then as soon as I hit apply, anytime somebody logs in now, it's going to do that console log. So we can actually try that out. If we try the login box, and I create a new account, sample.com. So I might have created a rule. You can see the password disappeared. I think I might have a rule. Let's see what happens if I sign up. I think this might fail because it's probably going to redirect me off to a third party. Yeah. So this is a feature of a previous demo. So let me just quickly, while we play around in here, I created an enterprise login for Azure AD
Oh,
over
that's why it
here.
was sending you to the...
And it basically says if the user logs in from example.com, then force them to use this system. So let me remove that.
See, this is also, and obviously anyone watching this the recording later, but this is also why we don't deploy it on a Friday afternoon.
Yes. So I'm just going to call this this logout script to log me out again. That's a bit of a cheat.
Oh yeah, to
let's
destroy
come back in here.
the...
Yeah, because we're going to try the login again, and I want to reset the session. So you come in, and I'm going to sign up. Hooray!
Yay!
So if I sign up now, it's going to say, "Woot, you've got an account." There you go. There's my account. This is the ID that I was referring to before in the Stripe example. So I've got my own. Now, if we come back over here and we go to monitoring logs, we can see that there was a success sign up. It's probably going to be in this one. Action details is a new one here that shows anything that comes out of actions. And you can see that the test action ran. And we can see the log here is example user exclamation mark. And that's the console log that we had. So you can even then see what's going on inside the actions in a live environment, which is quite powerful. So yeah, essentially we've taken the rules and hooks and kind of just souped them up to the nth degree. The idea, obviously, as you can see as well, is with these that there's going to be the ability to pull installed functions or installed actions into the authorization pipelines, and you can do that for pre-user registration. So you could actually stop the registration process if you wanted to, if they came from the wrong IP address, for example. IP address does not equal region, I know, but that's the kind of thing you could do. You could augment the user after registration. Maybe you want anybody to be able to register, but then once the registration is almost complete, you want to make a call to another service to add extra information into that user object within Auth0. You can do things when the password has just been changed after the person's logged in. Machine to machine is an interesting one. That's whenever you've got two computers, two servers, machines talking to each other, and you use the client credential workflow, which is basically one server saying to the Auth0 tenant, here's my client ID and secret, give me a token that I can use on that server. So there's no user involved in that, but you might want to augment the authorization flow there as well. And then, of course, you can change things when we send phone messages out. And there could potentially be more flows added to this in the future as well. So just, I don't know, it's a nice new packaged way of the extensibility that Auth0 has always had, just with more power.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you said earlier about new login methods being added, like really, really quickly, is I literally saw that Apple announcement come out, and then within the next day, it was already starting to appear in on sites that I was using, and I was like, oh, wow, that was quick. People integrated really fast. Then I realized I was using an Auth0 login. But I think that's one of the really good things that I've always liked about those embedded sort of box experiences in a lot of those sites is it's being added once somewhere else, and then it's already integrated, because quite often a lot of the companies like Auth0 have already got partnerships throughout the industry, so they already have it all set up ready to go.
The other thing as well, and this isn't particular to Auth0, this is any kind of software as a service provider. If your application relies on a third-party system, then you get automatic updates to your applications without having to redeploy them, which for a native mobile kind of ecosystem context is really important, because it can take a while sometimes for a new version of an application to be pushed through. Never mind the changes you need to make to it. You then have to push that into the various stores and have them approved. Whereas if it's relying on a service like this, you can make configuration changes to your tenant, or Auth0 can push out security updates, and it just happens magically. This is where I need the fireworks overlay. Yeah.
See, I've gotten pretty good at using OBS now. It's what I'm using now. Spoilers to anyone watching. But yeah, I've been trying to get hand tracking running. So that I can do that. You can do those whole, you can have magic the fireworks coming out, but I need a graphics card for it. So if anyone's watching and incidentally has a way to do that, please ping me. I tangented it. This is fun. It's it's the next level. I even tried using Elite Motion. I have one of those still. It doesn't really work with the current version of OS X, but that's a whole other discussion.
Fair enough.
No, thank you. So again, like one of the things I really love is for quick projects, especially is just being able to set up auth really, really quickly. And like Ben was saying, one of the things I think that's really cool is you literally can build out a shop super quickly and not need, or an e-commerce site and not need to set up a database and like get some hosting somewhere and set up all that. Like you could run this out of like GitHub pages and stuff too, couldn't you? Almost.
Yeah, you could. I was just trying to think. There was an issue I was having with GitHub pages, and that was basically because I was using Gatsby. But if you're, there are ways of hosting Gatsby-generated React-type static pages in GitHub for sure, and I've managed to get that going. But if you chose a different static page generating type tool, it could potentially be even easier. But yeah, there's no reason you can't.
Yeah, which is always good.
I've actually got this open over here. So this is Hoister I was talking about before. The first version of this was even hosted on GitHub pages. I moved it over to Netlify, I think, just for a better build process because I was using Gatsby. Yeah.
Sorry, I lost power there for a second. It kind of threw me off. I was like, wait, that doesn't normally happen. Yeah, I think I might be about to lose. But anyway, no, I still remember, seeing the live streams. And for anyone watching, like, please check it out. It's they're really handy to watch because Ben literally steps through like the process of creating the entire site, which I loved. So I did bring it up. Oh.
I am going to cheat and find my
video
post to this current session in here, because I can't post into the comments, but from here I can.
Oh, right. Put it into the...
Just mute it so it doesn't come through.
Yeah. I had to do that too.
See how soon that comes up in
the chat. It's a second or two. But
it's taken a while. There we go.
Awesome.
All right, switch away from that
I think we've kind of hit time, but just in wrapping up, is there anything you wanted to call out before we wrapped up? Or like it can be a book or an open source project, a developer movie or something, favorite restaurant that you've...
Favorite restaurant? I'm not getting out to restaurants at the moment. What are you talking about?
Me either.
I think my favorite restaurant is any restaurant that delivers via Deliveroo or Uber Eats or any of those at the moment. So
relatable.
I could do with more curry in my life right now. I've been eating, in terms of takeaways, I've been eating too much pizza. So anything curry would be good. Yeah, I will shout out curry as a generic. You remember the adverts for like Eat Lamb or Milk's good for you? It's not for a particular company. It's just like the industry lobbyist for blah. I want to shout out for curry. I think we should all have a curry.
Nice.
Support the curry industry, everyone.
Actually, I might have one tonight. Now that you've mentioned it, I kind of feel like.
I think I've only mentioned about 17 times. Did I mention curry?
You might have. No, thank you. Thank you for joining the live stream and for sharing all the things. I was about to switch that back. Thank you for just geeking out with us. For me, personally, I'd loved having you on, but also it's been a bit nostalgic because you kind of brought back things like Basic. I learned something in Basic, and then also even learning like the Auth0 actions and like literally being able to deploy a website without needing a server, which is kind of cool. I'm going to mention that at the next hackathon I'm at now because that actually would help some folks in the last one I was at like get up and running super quick. No, thank you for coming on. And just before we go, people can find you like on all the socials at Ben Dechrai. Yep.
If I can work out where my finger is.
No, you're in the
on
right
Twitter. My DMs are open. don't contact me on LinkedIn because it'll take me about 3 weeks to notice the message. But you're welcome to add me over there if you like. But yeah, I'd love to hear from any of you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on Sneak Live, and we'll look forward to chatting to you again soon.
Thanks for having me. Ciao.
Thank you. And just finally, just wrapping up, thank you all for joining this session. Keep an eye out for some upcoming sessions. We've got a whole bunch planned, including, for those, and anyone watching this pre-recorded, this might have already happened now, in which case, please go check it out. But we also have SneakCon coming up in October, so be sure to check that out. But otherwise, we'll see you all next time. Thank you very much.